My name is Shannon. Thank you, Aaron. I am a consultant with Civitas. I've been working with Civitas and their work for many years, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity to be with you guys on a beautiful Saturday. I'm in Texas, and I don't know about y'all's weather, but my weather is amazing. Happy to be with you all. We're going to go through some slides. There is a tiny bit of time at the end for questions, but if we don't have time and we have to close this out, I'll give you some resources to be able to do that at the end, or to follow up afterwards. So no worries. Welcome. Today's presentation is all about helping you all's family child care providers better understand the time-space calculations for tax purposes. This has a big it's very useful in regards to taxes, and it'll help you save a little bit of money there. So that's why you guys will might find this important. Understanding the tax specifics here is really crucial for helping childcare providers like yourselves to maximize savings, as I said, at tax time and properly file your taxes. Specifically, we'll be walking through the process in detail. Calculating the percentage of your home used for business is probably more math than you wanted to do on a Saturday, but we're going to do that. Um, the percentage allows providers to properly claim your tax deductions for a portion of utilities, mortgage interest, repairs, and other things that you make in your home. Our goal, of course, is to ensure that you have the knowledge that you need to accurately track and document your expenses. We want to empower you with the information and resources needed to assist you in minimizing your tax liability by using an accurate time-space calculation. So that's what we'll be doing today. This disclaimer is here to remind you, of course, that given what I just said, that this is about taxes, this is not intended to be tax advice or at all substitutes for you all seeking professional guidance from someone who can work with you and advise on your unique situation. We'll do our best to give you kind of general information, even answer, if we can, general questions and provide information to help you understand how it works. But absolutely, we encourage you to seek out a tax professional advisor if you need to. So just a little disclaimer there. So as I mentioned, here's what we'll cover during our time today. During this presentation, we'll start with why and when you'll want to use the time-space calculation. We'll dig here into how it works. As I said, more math than you might want. We'll go through some example calculations, and we'll talk about the difference between regular use and exclusive use, which is a critical concept to understand when you're getting an accurate calculation. Our goal here, right, is to give you as much information as possible to make sure you have you can do this accurately. And so that's why we'll kind of cover some of these really like niche concepts that are unique to family in-home based childcare. So why is it important? As a home-based family childcare provider, your business and your home are the same. Since the space is shared, many of your expenses overlap, meaning that they're for both your business and your personal use. So you need a way to determine how much of your expenses are considered business expenses. And the answer is simple than you think, and that's what we're doing here today. So using the time-space calculation, family child care home providers can figure out what percentage of their expenses can be deducted on their federal income taxes. Common expenses incurred by in-home childcare providers that overlap, as I mentioned, overlap both business and personal use include things like rent or your mortgage, property taxes in some cases, utilities, and other housing expenses that are necessary for your in-home business, like maintenance or repairs. Do know that if you have expenses that are solely dedicated for your business and have no element of the common use, right? Like a phone line, for instance, that's only used for your business and you never use it for personal use, or the purchase of outdoor equipment for children, again, that's not used personally, those expenses can be reimbursed at 100% cost. And so they're not included in something like the time-space calculation. That calculation, again, is just to like help you figure out the percentage of those shared expenses that are unique to your business and that can be attributed to your business. So your time space calculation, your time space percentage represents the portion of your expenses that are incurred for your home that you can also attribute to your business. Remember, this is about those shared costs. The time space calculation is a series of simple steps, and we'll walk through each of those, and then you can use those steps to find the percentage of your home expenses that you can attribute to business use. It considers the amount of time your home is used for business and the space within your home that's used for business. So that's why we call it time space, because we calculate, and technically, actually, today we're going to do the space first and then the time. But that's includes both, and so that's why we call it time space. So they're really like those two parts to this calculation. So let's take a closer look at these steps and we'll walk through some examples. And don't worry, we're going to go down in each of these steps. We're going to go in deeper, but this is just a little bit of overview. And we tried very hard to break this down really simply. This is a little bit of a complicated tax, um, you know, um, concept. So we know that it's difficult. So Civitas does a great job of breaking things down really simply into very simple steps. And so we'll go to each of these. We have 6 steps here for you to walk through on your own. And again, we'll go into each of these, but just as an overview, you have step 1, determine the square footage of your regular use space. So we'll look at that. And then once you have that square footage determined, you'll divide that number by your home's total square footage, right? And that gives you that percentage. And then you'll determine the amount of time your home is used for childcare. We'll look at that. And you'll divide those hours by 8,760, which of course is the total hours in the year. And that division, that calculation will give you the percentage of time. We'll multiply those time and space percentages that we just calculated. And then we'll also add in that exclusive use by dividing that space by the total square footage of the home and add it to your result. So again, it sounds a little complicated. We're going to walk through each one to make sure you understand. But using these steps, you can easily determine how many of your expenses can be reimbursed using grant funds or dedicated on your federal income taxes. And so again, right, we want this to be accurate and we want to maximize what's your business costs because those are the things that can be, help mitigate your tax burden. So I keep mentioning these phrases, right? Regular use, exclusive use. And this is just a little bit of an important concept to understand before we get into those calculations, those steps that I just covered. In your time space percentage, you'll classify your space in your home as either regular use or exclusive use. And it's important to know how to distinguish these spaces because as you saw in those steps we just looked at, they're calculated differently in the equation. So you want to know how to distinguish them and how they should be included in your time space if they're indeed applicable. All right, so let's look at regular use first. So regular use are spaces that are used all day, like a play area or for only part of the day, like a napping area. Though and these areas are considered regular use because these spaces have other uses during non-business hours. Like let's say the kids like take naps in your bedroom, right? Well, when the kids aren't there, you're also using the bedroom for your personal use. So there's overlap, but only a part of the space is used for business purposes partly. So whether the space is used all day or just part of the day for your business, it count towards your time space calculation. So if you have those spaces that you use for both business and personal, you'll want to use them. You'll calculate those square footage for those regularly used spaces together. So everything that's included in your home and falls into that regular use bucket. Um, hi, this is my cat Bowie. He came to say hello to my Oregon friends. Um, so you'll look at all those regularly used spaces in your home and you will add the square footage of those spaces together. Now this differs, of course, from exclusive use. Exclusively used spaces are only used for your childcare program and nothing else personal. So that means you and other members of your household do not use this space at all for other than childcare purposes. So when children aren't there, you're not using it at all. And so when we think of that exclusive use bucket, we'll add that square footage of each of those like exclusively used spaces together to determine the area of your home that you use only for childcare. I will say, I think I have this note in a second, but I'll say a little bit more about that. So we separate these two buckets, the regular use bucket, meaning you also use it for personal use, and that exclusive use bucket, you use it only for your business. We separate the two categories when it comes to space because they're each weighted in our time space calculation differently. So once you get to the time portion of time space calculation, it weighs how much time regularly used spaces are used for business versus personal. And exclusively used spaces, as you can imagine, is calculated at 100% because you only use it for business. Does that make sense? So you want those two buckets to be different. Exclusively used spaces are weighted at 100% because there's no other use for those spaces, whereas regularly used spaces are weighted at the portion of time you use your home for business purposes versus how much time it's used as your home. Let me see if I say this. Let me go back here to this because I just want to say one thing. Exclusive use is going to be a very small percentage of your home if you have it at all. So some people don't have it at all, meaning you have no places in your home that you only use for your business. Many people don't have any exclusively used places at all. So don't worry if you take a look at your activities and you realize that every place in your home is used for both business and personal use. If you do have exclusively used spaces, it's probably very small, like a closet where you only store things for your business or something like that. So I just want to make that comment. That doesn't mean that you can't have something bigger, like you might have a basement that you only use for exclusive use. But you'll really have to, it's a very high bar. So the IRS really wants you to prove that it's only used for business use, right? Because they're allowing you a business deduction at 100%. So be very careful when you think about those exclusive use versus regular use, because there's a very high bar, right? You would have to say, like, prove that you only use it for business and never for personal use. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so now that we've got that out of the way, you'll see how that comes into play differently because we talk about regular use first and we use the time calculation to help us calculate that. And then you'll see at the end, we come back to those exclusive use spaces because they're weighted at that 100%. So step one in the calculation is simple. We will start kind of measuring the square footage of our regular use space. So the first step is to figure out how much space in your home is regularly used for childcare. We just talked about what regular use means. Regular use means that any area you use for childcare at least once a week. So maybe there's you use a part of the basement only for like art time on Fridays. So that counts in regular use. Whether it's used all day or just for part of the day, again, like your napping area is a good example, right? Your napping area isn't used all day, but it's used regularly during the week. So here's what you need to do to make to kind of measure the square footage of those areas. Take a measuring tape, measure the length and the width of each space you regularly use for childcare. That can be by room, or you can break up rooms into smaller chunks so that they're easier to measure. You'll multiply the length times the width to get the square footage of that space. And then when you do that, but room by room or space by space, you'll add up all those square footages. Where was I? Okay, so you'll add up all of those regularly used spaces that you mentioned or you measured. Now you might be wondering about spaces that are exclusively used, like we talked about, and those are those areas only used for your business. Don't worry about them, as I said, we'll kind of come back to them at the end. So right now you're only measuring those regularly used spaces. So still here in part one. So again, like when we're talking, you want to be as accurate as possible when you're getting these measurements of your childcare spaces. So you'll need a tape measure, something to record those measurements, as we said. You'll begin maybe with the longest wall, and you'll measure that by using your tape measure to the beginning and the end. You'll want to ensure like that's as accurate as possible. Sometimes it's helpful to have a second person to do this. Make sure it's in feet, right? Feet, like, 9 feet, 10 inches or something like that. And then you'll measure the shortest wall using that same technique. And then, of course, you'll multiply them. Once you have those two measurements, the length and the width of your space, that's the basis really to calculating the square footage. Um, as you evaluate your childcare spaces, right, remember that that regular use encompasses any area used for childcare at least once a week. I will say too that um, I'm just looking at the comments here really quick. Okay. Um, Remember too that if you have spaces in your home that you only use for personal use, they're not included in any of these calculations because they wouldn't be part of your calculation. So anything that's just used for personal and never for business, we won't be measuring any of those spaces. So this regular use means only that are, regularly used for your childcare. So once you've calculated the square footage of each regularly used space, you'll add those measurements together, as we said, and that sum represents the total area of your home regularly used for childcare. So like I saw somebody in the comments was saying they just use their living room. Great. That makes it super easy for you. So you only have to measure that one space. Let's say you're using your living room, a little bit of your dining room. Obviously, you use your kitchen to prepare snacks or something. So you'll want to measure all those spaces and then add them up. Norma, I'll get to the question in a second about separate from your house. So if you regularly use, like I said, your living room, your kitchen, and like a nap room, you'll calculate the square footage of each room separately, and then you'll add all those measurements together, and that'll give you the total square footage of your regularly used space or of space regularly used for your childcare business. And we'll kind of use that to keep going. Once you have your measurements, calculating the square footage is pretty straightforward. So you'll multiply the length. Well, we're backtracking a little bit, but the length times the width gives you that square footage. Like I said, this is breaking this example a little bit. So we measured one wall, we measured another wall, and we multiply those together and we get that total square footage. So in this example, right, if the space is 12 feet long and 10 feet wide, that multiplication equals 120 square feet for that room. So, as I mentioned earlier about kind of irregularly shaped rooms, if you have rooms or spaces that you're measuring that are irregularly shaped, like rooms with little alcoves or built-in closets, for example, just divide the room into smaller squares that are easier to measure, and that will help you kind of break down the rooms. And then when you add it up, it'll get the same amount. So you don't have to be like an engineer to figure out how to get these like differently shaped rooms to total your square footage. Okay, so step 2 is you want to determine that space percentage for your whole space. So we've calculated and we added up all of the spaces in our home regularly used for childcare. And we want to determine what percentage of your home is dedicated to your business. So that calculation can be done by simply taking the square footage of your childcare space that you just calculated. Remember, like let's say in our example that we did our living room, our kitchen, and a nap space. So we added all those up and that gave us the total square footage dedicated to our childcare business regularly. And then we want to divide that by the total square footage of our home. So let's say we have an example here. So let's say in this example, right, you use 500 square feet regularly for childcare, and your home is 1,000 square feet. So you multiply those together, or I'm sorry, divide 500 into 1,000, and that of course gives you 0.5. And so that comes out to 50%. So I promised there'd be a little bit of math, and so nothing comes easy, so we have to do a little bit of math for this. So you'll take that total square footage, you divide it, or total square footage for your business, divide it by the total square footage of your home, and that'll give you that percentage of your home that's used regularly for childcare. In this example, it's 50%. So this means that 50% of your home is regularly used for childcare purposes. Important note regarding outdoor spaces. Norma, this is probably your question. Um, Obviously, there's a lot of spaces that are probably really important to your childcare business. Maybe some of them are outside. Maybe you have a detached garage that kids sometimes play in. They are vital to your business, but they cannot be included in your time space calculation. It's only external spaces that are physically attached to your home. So if you have a deck, for example, that's attached to your home and that kids play on, you can include that. If you have a garage that's attached to your home that they regularly use, you can also include that, but you can't include spaces that are separate from your home. So I think that gets to your question, or to your question. It's a good one. Thanks, Norma. All right. So here in step 3, we kind of move to time. So determine the amount of time that your home is used for childcare. So we've already determined the amount of space, right? In our example calculation, it was 50% of a space used regularly for childcare. Now we need to determine the amount of time that's used for childcare during the year. Because, right, we're not open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So to do this, we need to calculate how many hours your childcare space is open per week, including the time that you spend preparing and cleaning up when the children are not present. So you'll take the number of weeks you were open for service. Once you look at like the average amount of time per week that you do, are open in for childcare and for preparing and for cleaning up. So you'll bookend the time, of course, that you're open to account for the time you're actually doing your business. And you'll multiply that number by the weeks that you're open in the year. All right. So how we do that. So to start by calculating your weekly hours, you would absolutely want to include your regular operating hours when children are present. So let's say you're open like 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., for example. You'll also include the time spent preparing before children arrive. So even though children aren't present, if you're doing things for your business before they get there, you'll want to include that time as well. Same with after they leave. If you spend time on your business after children leave, you'll want to include that cleanup time, or maybe you use that time to set up for your next day, etc. Any kind of things you do on the weekend, like menu planning or food preparation, any activity setup or material organization that you do, you'll want to include that also. You'll include record keeping or any administrative tasks if like there's time that you're working on your paperwork or you have to work professional development or anything like that, you'll include those things that happen in your home for your business, okay? Now sometimes I recommend that if you really wanted to get an accurate view of this, like take a couple months and kind of like keep track of your time over the year or over those, few weeks. And then you can kind of use those as example weeks and extrapolate it over the year. But often you know how you run your business and you know how many hours you're spending. So consider a scenario like an example scenario like this. Let's say you work 5 days a week. Your childcare is open for 10 hours per day. You spend 1 hour preparing before children arrive, and you spend 1 hour cleaning up after they leave. So that's an additional 2 hours a day. So that totals 12 hours a day. You also experience a 2 week closure, like let's say it could be for COVID, but it's probably more likely for holidays or something like that. Then you spend 10 hours maintaining the space and preparing to reopen during your closure. So you want to if there are any places that you're closed, you'll want to add in any of hours that, even though you're closed, that you still spent on your business. So to calculate our total annual hours in that example, we have 12 hours per day times 5 days a week times 50 weeks a year. That's 3,000 hours open and working. And then you'll add those 10 hours worked during your closure. That's 3,010 annual hours in total hours. Does that make sense? So you took the hours in a day times 5 days a week times the weeks that you're open, and then include any of those miscellaneous hours that you're working that you might be closed. So that final number that you get represents all the time that your home is used for childcare purposes throughout the year, including preparation, direct care hours, and cleanup time. So that you can see the math down here of how that works out. So the total hours that you're working every day times how many weekdays of the week you're open times how many weeks you're open in the year, plus any kind of random hours that you're working, like even though you're closed for Christmas. Make sense? All right, so now we're ready to look at our time space percentage. So we'll calculate what percentage of the year your home is devoted to childcare operations. And this is done by dividing your total childcare hours by the total number of hours in a year, which is 8,760. And don't worry, as Annie says in the chat, you will have a worksheet that walks you through everything. So if you remember in our previous time calculation, in our example, it was 3,010 annual childcare hours. You'll divide 8,760 by 3,010 hours to get this example here, 0.344. Multiplying that by 100 to get the percentage is 34.4% of time. And this is only, remember, this is only doing time so far. So this percentage tells us that that your home is used for childcare purposes 34.4% of the time, 34% throughout the year. So this is the time percentage of your time space. So this time percentage combined with your space percentage from step 2 will determine the business use portion of your home for our final calculation. Everybody ready to do that? Let's do it. All right, so we have our space percentage with our square footage of regular use, and we have our time percentage of the calculations of how much we're working divided by the total hours in the year. So from here, we'll determine the final percentage of your home expenses that can be attributed to your business. The calculation combines both the space and the time percentages that we just calculated in steps 2 and 3. So simply divide your space percentage by your time percentage. And so you may recall that our space percentage in our example was 50%, 0.5. The time percentage from the step we just did was 34.4. So here you can see 50% times 34.4% or 0.5 times 0.344 equals 0.17 to 172 or 17.2%. So this final percentage, 17.2%, represents the portion of your home expenses that you can claim as business expenses for your childcare. This means that 17.2% of eligible home expenses, like rent and mortgage, like utilities, like property taxes, like insurance, and repairs, can be deductible as business expenses. So like, let's say you, had to replace the carpet in your living room. So given this calculation, 17.2% of the calculation of, or the cost of adding that or changing that carpet is a business expense according to the IRS. So once you have your time space calculation, it's really good to kind of help you understand a variety of costs as they come up. I will say like this example is a good one because it comes out to like 17, like, 15 to 20%, sometimes less, depending on, sometimes more. This is a great example, but it really will depend. It will depend on the size of your home. It depends on how your business is run. It depends on how much you're open. So there's no like standard. You can't say to me, Shannon, does, 23% time space sound right? And I wouldn't know because it's really dependent. That's why we always say like you have to do the calculation yourself, right? So again, this time space percentage, like knowing this, once you know it, it's a valuable tool for accurately reporting your business expenses while maintaining compliance with tax regulations. And you'll want to keep, by the way, before I don't forget, we haven't done exclusive use yet. Remember, we said we were going to come back to that. Before we do that, This is like middle school math. You will want to absolutely make sure to show your work. Keep really detailed records of your calculations, right? Even if it's like, here's my living room, here's the percentage, here's my playroom, here's the measurements, here's my time, here's how I calculated it. Keep those records, keep your work, show your work, and make sure you're tracking your eligible expenses for your tax documentation. Okay? All right, so let's not forget our friend exclusive use over here. Okay, so we promised that, member, we talked about how regular use spaces and exclusively used spaces are calculated or weighted differently in our calculation. We want to make sure here at the end to add in our exclusively used space. And we don't have to put this in before because it's not subject to our time. Because we've already said by it being exclusively used, it's used 100% of the time for business. So that's why we kind of leave it out until the end because we want to separate it from it being divided by the time. So remember, these exclusive use spaces are areas only used for your childcare business and never for personal use. So let's calculate this step by step. So we determine the percentage of our home that's exclusively used for childcare. Let's say in this case it's 100 square feet. I think that's probably a lot. Again, like I said, usually these spaces are really small, but let's just say exclusive use space for our example is 100 square feet, and the total square footage of your home is 1,000 square feet. And so you'll divide 100 by into 1,000, and that gives you 0.10 or 10%. So that's saying that 10% of your home is used 100% of the time for your childcare business, right? And so now we'll add this exclusive use percentage to our time space percentage. So time space percentage from the step we just did was 17.2, remember, or 0.172. And we have that 10% that's exclusive use. Again, you might not have any. If you have it, it's probably small. In this case, it's 10% for as an example. So that's 0.10. And so you'll add 0.172 and add 0.10 to get 0.272% or 27.2%. And you can see that here in our example. So that 27.2% is your final time space calculation. That final percentage represents the total business use of your home. So this is the percentage that you can apply to your home expenses when you're applying for grant reimbursements, for example, when you're calculating your tax deductions, and when you're determining the business expenses for your annual tax filing. That's why we want to keep such good records. You want to make sure your calculations are clear, and you want to be very judicious when you're saying this is exclusive use versus regular use. So remember to maintain detailed documentation of both your exclusive use spaces. And remember, I talked about how high that bar is, and your time space calculations to support your expense claims. Because because you're using this as proof for some expenses, they'll want to see your work and justify how you did it. That makes sense? Okay, so Annie mentioned a worksheet, and we have used this in many, many states around the country. It's really helpful, and once you start kind of getting into it, it walks through each steps that I talked about. So to make these calculations easier, you want to use the time space percentage worksheet that Civitas has provided. The worksheet is a digital version of the calculation that we just walked through. Thank you, Annie, for adding that into the chat there. Make sure to grab it, and there should be an English and Spanish version there. The worksheet is a digital version of the calculation that we just did, and it guides you through each step we discussed and helps you accurately calculate it for your specific situation. And remember, I talked about everybody's is going to be different. Kathleen, if you look right above your comment in the chat, there is a link there that Annie put in, and I'm sure we'll add it again. So when I mentioned, I keep talking about taxes and how this is relevant for your taxes. So a little bit of tax consideration here. So when you apply your time space calculation for tax purposes, it's essential to understand how to properly document and report these expenses. The IRS provides detailed guidance through Form 1820, I'm sorry, 8829, 8829. That's the work form called Expenses for Business Use of Your Home. And so that form helps you document your home business expenses properly. It allows you to calculate allowable deductions, report your business use of home accurately, and maintain compliance with tax regulations. And so when you use that form and you have your time space calculation, that's where it'll come into play when you're, reporting your business use of home, when you're talking about allowable deductions. Um, they don't want to see on there that you're an in-home childcare provider and you have 100% of all of these expenses because they know you're in your home, right? So they want you to accurately represent the percentage of time and space that your home is used for your business versus personal. Um, so professional guidance, given the complexity, and I talked about this when I showed you the disclaimer, given the complexity of tax regulations and the importance of accurate reporting, absolutely we encourage you to work with a professional tax preparer that is familiar with family childcare businesses. And that last part is really important because what we're talking about here, this time space calculation, is actually really unique in the small business world. You guys who are in-home childcare providers have to do this, and no other small business that operates out of their home has to do it this way. So when you're looking out for professional advice, find someone who's familiar with family childcare businesses, okay? That's really important because it's a hard concept to understand. It's first of all, it's important that you all understand it. And then if you're seeking advice, you'll absolutely want to find someone who is familiar with this work. Okay. And then, of course, remember that tax laws can change and your specific situation has unique considerations. I've talked about that earlier. We're talking about, Angel, that was Form 8829. We're talking about in general, my job here is to relay this important information, but anything that's specific to you may change like how this is viewed or that is worked. So you want to absolutely make sure that your specific situation kind of conforms to this general use case that I'm talking about. If you have a tax professional that build you trust and you have a good relationship with them, absolutely regularly consult with them to help ensure you're maximizing your eligible deductions while maintaining proper documentation and compliance. So those are some really important caveats. All right. So we'll do a little bit of wrap up here, and then we may have a couple times for questions, and I can kind of go back through this chat and see if we at least got to, everything we can talk about. Um, and we'll make sure that you have the form that Annie dropped in the chat. It looks like it's a little bit tricky to oh, there you go. Thank you, Annie. Great. She's doing some screenshots there in the chat to help everybody figure out how to save a copy that's editable. So thank you guys for taking the time to join me this morning. I'm sorry there was a little bit of confusion about the time. And then, of course, I made you do math, and those are never fun, but I'm happy you joined and happy you kind of stuck with it. So thanks for taking the time to join with today. Before we close, let's take a little bit of refreshing time to see what we did. After our discussion today, it's our hope that you understand the importance of time space running your home-based business. And remember, this is something that's unique to you, and we want to make sure that you have the ability to understand it and calculate it yourself. Understand the difference between exclusive and regular use. Determine the time space percentage for your home. So we ideally with our worksheet and with the recording of our session today, you could go back and you could work on this yourself. Don't forget to track your work. We really hope this information is valuable. All right. It looks like Annie turned off our translation, so I should have Emily back.